Hi there, folks. Very welcome to this Thin Scale webinar with Peter Ryan on Unpacking the CX Industry's Global Investment Trends. My name is Lauren Taggart and I'm the Sales Director here globally in Thin Scale Technology. Joining me today needs no introduction. A man that many of you I'm sure will know from the industry is Peter Ryan from Ryan Advisory. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today for this discussion.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to catch up with yourself. I only saw you a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta for CX Outsourcers, and it's nice to be able to catch up virtually once again with you in Dublin and me in my hometown of Montreal.
Absolutely, Peter. And what a pleasure it was to finally meet you in person after many discussions virtually like this across the globe. And CX Outsourcers, for those that don't know, is, a very, you used the words with me yesterday, actually, of you want to be exclusive because there's maybe 100 people there, real strategic thinkers and mindsets in the CX space. But you're also inclusive. What I noticed, particularly as a woman in the industry, how many fabulous women leaders that there are that attend that event. And I got a lot from that as well. So the next one, folks, is this side of the pond in Munich, Germany. So we'll pop in the link to this chat as well. So anyone that's interested can sign up for that event too.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for the support, Lauren. And thanks to Thin Scale for being a wonderful partner since really the inception of the event post-pandemic. It truly means a lot to us.
Our pleasure, Peter. So today what we're going to do is deep dive into a report, Peter, that you provide to us and many key stakeholders in the CX space. That report's called the Omnibus Survey. For those that don't know, perhaps you can share with the folks on today's call what that survey is, who it's useful for and why.
Sure. So the Front Office CX Omnibus Survey is an initiative that we have been undertaking at my company since we founded it back in 2017. Now, we're up to our 7th iteration of the survey, Lauren. What we aim to do with the Omnibus Survey annually is to get a sounding of what enterprise contact center leaders, strategists, people who are running customer experience on the buy side are thinking when it comes to outsourcing, what they're thinking about in terms of technology procurement. What are their investment priorities? What are the biggest pain points running their own in-house captive operations? What are their views on different CX delivery business models? Obviously with remote working and work from home becoming such a thing these days, getting a sense about how that whole dynamic is playing out. Also, a big part of it is the assessment of the offshore and the extent to which organizations are willing to prioritize domestic delivery versus onshore versus nearshore or offshore delivery. So it's a fairly comprehensive report. The benchmarking survey report that we publish, in fact, we just published, is roughly 120 pages. And this is our biggest survey ever. We sounded the views of 750 respondents in 11 different countries across Asia Pacific, North America, and Western Europe. And they represented up to nearly 20 different industry verticals. So to our knowledge, it's the largest survey of CX buyers anywhere that's being done in the world today.
Super, appreciate that, Peter. And from somebody that works in the CX space day in, day out, I find that was my Bible for the past few weeks over my cup of coffee or my bedtime reading. And I certainly find it very interesting how, dare I say the word, but COVID, since things have happened, since COVID, the different trends, what we've seen, how AI as well is impacting the CX space as well. So I've certainly taken a lot from that report. So perhaps we can look a little bit further into that report. So looking at the survey, there was a very clear emphasis on investment in security, which is obviously something that we're very passionate about here in Thin Scale, and business continuity above everything else. What do you think is motivating this, Peter, now?
Look, I think that there are some parallel issues motivating BCP and security, but I also think that there are certainly some inflection points. Let's take a look, Lauren, right off the top at the extent to which cybersecurity has become such a dynamic within any operation of any business. Hardly a week goes by now without some high-profile hack being announced. Hardly a week goes by without information having been released about consumers that have been penetrated through a database by threat actors and so forth. And I think that the extent to which organizations are understanding, not just from a compliance and a regulatory standpoint, but from the standpoint of building trust up with the end users, with their own consumer base, they've got to be able to emphasize that information security is going to be top of mind. And I know it's very in vogue, and I hate to use this expression, very sexy, to talk about cybersecurity and cyber hacking,
Sure.
but it's beyond that. I mean, it's legitimately what type of security enforcement are contact centers running in terms of their day-to-day operations, with regards to, are they allowing writing materials or writing utensils at individuals' desks? If it's work from home, who is actually operating a computer in a home? How are you validating the identity of somebody who's sitting down to do remote working from a CX perspective? I've seen some amazing deployments of contact centers in different parts of the world where they actually take things so seriously. And I'll give you an example on this one, because it always stood out to me. A contact center somewhere in Latin America, where there was an effort to try and identify tattoos on people who were coming and applying for contact center jobs, to make sure that they didn't have gang-related tattoos. And if they did, they'd be identified by a doctor or a nurse when the individual is having their physical, and they would be ruled out immediately. So there's all sorts of different elements around data protection that are driving, I think, this whole dynamic around the need to invest in security to ensure the watertight nature of end user information.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I always use the emphasis too that, no matter how good the technology is, it's how do you protect the individuals. There's a lot of vulnerable individuals as well out there. But I was laughing, but in some ways it's very true. I was at an event in Enterprise Ireland recently, and I was speaking to a CSO of a global brand, one that makes many shoes. So of course I had a lot of interest in speaking with that.
I would imagine, yeah.
And he said to me, Lauren, it's not really the contact center agents I'm actually worried about. It's the CEO, because the CEO is actually the person that is most vulnerable in terms of actually hitting a link. And then when I broke it down about how sophisticated links are now being, particularly on those contact center agents, I mean, we even have it in thin scale. They prey on, maybe someone that's an intern or starting out their career, and they pretend to be our CEO. And they've the picture of the CEO. They're very sophisticated in terms of what they're asking them to do. So we see it even in our own business. So that's something from a cybersecurity perspective. It's happening daily. As you said, on the news as well, they're only last week there was a major healthcare business in the United States that was hacked. The healthcare system here in Ireland's been hacked a couple of times. So it's everywhere, whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not, exactly. And you're spot on with regards to the links that are going out in the spoofing emails. It's very easy to actually spoof an email these days. So I think that what it comes right down to is vigilance, and it comes down to being able to almost, if your gut's telling you something's not right, you just don't click on it. And I'm horrified by the number of emails I get personally each day that are clearly spoofs, that are clearly phishing attempts. And the reality is it only takes one time for an email to get through, for someone to be busy, and they say, oh boy, I need to update my payment details here, click, and then game over.
Exactly. So I think just with that in mind, in terms of, is there a perception amongst CX leaders that it's getting harder, more complicated to protect themselves as well as their clients?
I don't think there's a view that's becoming more complicated. I think there's a view that is becoming more overwhelming. The reality is that there's always an evolution in security measures. And as security is beefed up, as new provisions are brought in, the bad actors, the threat actors, are going to get more sophisticated themselves. That's just the reality of it. It's almost like a chicken and egg and a snowball situation, to use a couple of cliches. Where I think the big issue is the volume of attempts, whether it's cyber hacking, whether it's attempts to put the wrong people into a contact center environment, whether it's multiple attempts perhaps in different locations. We have heard about this in the past of agents being intimidated by potentially gang members or members of not so savory groups who've found their way into the contact center to provide information of end users. These are just multiplying in terms of volume because of the fact that information of consumers is such a lucrative business. The bad actors, the threat actors, are becoming much more aggressive and much more diversified in the manners in which they're going after these elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, I know we're having obviously a great discussion, and Peter and I could probably talk the legs off a donkey, but excuse my Irish expression there. But feel free to pop any questions that you have into the chat, and more than happy to answer those as we go through this as well. When I was looking at the survey, obviously for me, I was homing in on the work from home, the security elements that that we do day in, day out. One of our policies right now in terms of our marketing messaging is that we stop data breaches, where VPNs, antivirus, those things that pre-COVID and pre-work from home, everybody thought they were secure. We've still a lot of people come to us thinking that they're still secure, and then they realize that really they have to protect the endpoint and the person behind the endpoint as well and operating it. So when I read the report, 53% of your respondents answered that enforcing their security posture was the biggest challenge. And I find that very interesting when it comes to remote and hybrid working. Do you think that this is a product of the trend that we've seen towards BYOD, or is this a bigger issue in general for CX?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, at the end of the day, ensuring that the security posture is enforced is definitely a major point of contention within the scope of challenges around supporting remote or hybrid workers. And Lauren, let's be perfectly frank here. I think we can all acknowledge that remote or hybrid is going to become a much bigger part of how CX is being done. I would say it's gone from almost like a niche a few years ago, pre-pandemic. Yeah. Now it's a structural part of how CX is delivered. Now, I will say this, though. We are seeing a push by the clients of outsourcers to shift agents back into the contact center. Sure. The outsourcers and the enterprise, the captives, are also facing the challenge that the agents don't want to go. So we're still, I think, finding that balance. But I think we should all, as in the context of this question, realize that enforcing a security posture is going to become much more of a thing as more agents are going to be deployed remotely at least part of the week. So, at the end of the day, from where I'm coming from on this, being able to ensure the maximum compliance with security provisions for remote agents is going to be a very, very big factor in terms of making sure that the provider of the technology, i.e. the outsourcer or the enterprise, is doing what they need to do, but also making sure that the agent is following through on their side.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, what we see as well from a trend perspective is, it's a highly competitive space, particularly in the BPO industry, as you and I both know. And what we've seen is whenever that push has came from certain BPOs, they're losing their agents at a higher attrition, which nobody wants because attrition is one of the number one problems, right? And they're losing them to their biggest competitor. And then they're struggling to hire because the others are then pushing that you can work from home because that's what people want now for their flexibility, for whatever suits them in their personal life. So what we're seeing is that when we actually end up speaking to end clients of BPO and helping that education of it is possible to do secure work at home, things start getting better in place in terms of that acceptance for those particular clients. I'm on a call later tonight with one of a very large BPO to speak to one of the top healthcare providers in the United States because they've claimed you can't do it securely, but we're going to prove them in half an hour that you can, and hopefully we'll close that. But I think there's a lot of education that has to be done, and that's something that I personally am very passionate about in helping our BPO and CX customers in helping understand with their enterprise clients that it can be done so that they make sure that those attrition rates stay as low as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And you're I think drawing a very important link between the fact that you can have an impact, a positive impact on attrition, which I think we all agree
Mhm.
is one of the biggest cost sinkholes within any type of
Absolutely.
a contact center, by actually making the agent's job easier from a technology standpoint. And kudos to Thin Scale in terms of what you're doing in that, and really taking a leadership role within the industry in that regard.
Super. So we were talking there briefly about work from home and versus on site. So what way do you feel that the market is starting to shift there? You'd mentioned what's driving that is really the end clients. But do you think that it's predominantly because of security concerns, or do you think it's about attracting talent? What do you think are all those different pieces that are fitting into that, Peter?
Look, I think there's a couple of things to take into account here. That when we're talking about the growth of work from home, certainly I think talent management cannot be underestimated. The reality is that more people prefer to work at least part of the week
Sure.
in the residence, or remotely in a compliant area. Um, my own view on it, Lauren, is that everybody has got their own preference. I'm starting to hear some degree of pushback from the agent community who are saying, well, I'd actually like to go back in center. I miss working with colleagues. I miss friends. I'd like to make friends. I'd like to meet people. Let's be perfectly frank. When you get to your working age, when you're an adult, or even in say in your late teens, early 20s, you might be working in a contact center for a
Sure.
part-time job. This is where you make friends. This is where you meet people. It's at school and it's at work. And I think that there is definitely an appetite amongst a lot of individuals to at least work part of the week in a contact center, just for that whole social aspect. And maybe it comes down to the opportunity to get some in-person training or feedback from the supervisor. Everyone's got their own preference. But there's definitely also a recognition that if you're going to be running an effective CX operation, unless it's in an incredibly compliance heavy industry, the odds are you're going to be having to work from home with a fair amount of your team members. Now, this is where it gets interesting, I think, because the issue or the perception that a lot of individuals have had about work from home not being as secure, not being as compliant, not being as watertight from the standpoint of managing agents, I think to a large degree, those concerns have really evaporated. What I pick up
Sure.
is amongst the buying community, the captive side, there seems to be an understanding that the technologies and the processes that are being developed over the course of the past several years have really negated a lot of the problems that we've seen in the past with regards to, say, somebody logging in to work from home, but it's not actually the individual who should be the agent, that type of thing. That's really something that you don't hear too much about. And I've always had this theory that the moment you heard of a major data breach being caused from a work from home agent, the entire industry from a work from home standpoint would cease to exist, and that everything would really be forced back in center. We've really not seen that. And I think the longer that this plays out, the less likely a scenario like that is going to actually occur. So bottom line, when it comes right down to it, work from home, remote delivery is definitely a very big part of what's going on in the industry. I predict that it's going to stay that way. We're at like I say, at a bit of an inflection point. I think we're trying to figure out exactly what the balance is going to be in terms of how much work from home versus how much proportionately in center.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I think we're now really at that area in time where it's accepted, and we're just moving forward with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on that subject, we've had a question come in the chat, so thank you for your question. The question is, do you believe that enforcing the shift of having agents go back to the office have a positive impact when it comes to data security?
It would be easy to say yes, absolutely, when it's back in
Sure.
the office. Yes, there's going to be a positive impact. I mean, I don't see necessarily a downside to it, but I also don't necessarily think it's going to be a panacea. As I was saying before, I think that the technologies that have enabled remote working have become extremely watertight over the course of the past several years. I also think it's not just the technologies, it's also the processes. And that, Lauren, one of the things that I will tell you, when we started researching at the analyst house I was working with back 2 decades ago, work from home is really niche. It was really new. But one of the things that I think was so important in terms of making sure that work from home was effective from a security standpoint was the hiring practices. The extensive background checks, the credit checks, the police checks, and making certain that the people you were bringing on were not the types of individuals that would be necessarily tempted or have the motivation to do something nefarious.
Sure.
And this is, I think, when you factor the people, the processes, and the technology all together, I think that you're probably looking at a situation where work from home has never been more secure, and that certainly while you go back into the office, you can make a case and an argument for in-person supervision and making certain that individuals, or being able to supervise individuals to do your best to see that they're not pulling some type of a stunt. But at the end of the day, one supervisor, are they going to be able to watch a team of 10, 15 people all at once all the time? Probably not.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a fair assumption. And what I've seen too, Peter, I joined ThinScale the 30th of March 2020, right? So
wow.
a crazy time in the world. And when I started, we only had, a handful, even if, of BPO clients that were really bought into BYOD, work at home. And they were really in the top 10. Had those models, hadn't really even kicked off them properly, if I'm being totally truthful. And I know that they won't mind saying, because of where they've now got to. And then COVID happened. The influx of leads came into us because we were established and known to be secure. And that kind of hit the kind of top 20, 25 and a handful of others. But now what we're seeing, and what my team are seeing in terms of what leads we're getting, how we're talking in terms of business as well, is all those other kind of more niche BPOs, other markets that perhaps couldn't afford to do it before, are now starting to talk more strategically to us about that. So I think it's a very interesting thing that what we're seeing is, whilst there may be a shift to back to office in some instances, including some of those top BPOs, what we're seeing is all those niche BPOs starting to come into play whenever it comes to work from home.
Yeah, and you used a very important word there, and that's niche. And this is something I always like to talk to my clients about, in the sense of the more niche you're looking at getting into in regards to maybe servicing a particular function or a particular industry, the more likely you're going to need to adopt a remote working strategy. And I'll give you an example. We know from the pharmaceutical industry, it's incredibly challenging to get trained pharmacists to be able to come into a contact center to support maybe, prescriptions, or to support different types of medications and inquiries around it. But if you just tweak the job title and tweak the role a little bit, make it remote working, and all of a sudden they become a pharmaceutical consultant, and they're working remotely, and they're putting their skills and their understanding of their subject matter expertise to use, well, it becomes a whole different ballgame. The same you could make it perhaps in the case of trained nurses. It's very hard to get trained nurses to want to come and work in a contact center. Working from home and supporting individuals who might be having some health ailments. Lots of countries now have these telephone hotlines where you can contact and speak to a trained nurse. I've done it a number of times, and it's really great in terms of keeping individuals out of the clinics, or God help us, out of the hospitals. But when it comes right down to it, the fact is, it's going to be hard to get these people to go in to work in a typical contact center, but it's much more straightforward to get them to come in and work from perhaps their residence or from a secure remote location.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that kind of brings us full circle, Peter, that we talked at the start about us both attending CX Outsourcer in Atlanta. And me, there was a lot of niche BPOs there, and also a lot of emerging BPOs. The two real topics that I particularly loved that were discussed there were AI and the impact. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And the emerging markets piece as well. I found that to be tremendously interesting. What were some of the key talking points for yourself, Peter, from CX Outsourcers, and what's keeping CX executives awake at night, dare I even ask?
Well, considering I'm one of the 3 organizers and partners of CX Outsourcers, asking me about my standout topics, that's like asking
How long do
a
we have?
parent who's I was going to say it's like asking a parent who's your favorite child. And yeah, I honestly think that they were all great. I think for me
Yeah.
there were a couple of standouts. And I think this applies to what we're talking about here today, Lauren. The compliance panel, where we had individuals from the European Union, from Jamaica, from the United States, talking about key trends around compliance and regulation, especially when it comes to data security. I really got a lot out of, because they were talking about issues that maybe aren't as flashy or as shiny as perhaps there are other ones in the whole CX debate, but it's incredibly essential, especially with the evolution about how compliance is changing and becoming much more strict in a lot of different jurisdictions. So I certainly would point to that one as a major standout. I think also the one in which we had the rapid fire sessions of the 3 enterprise buyers. And you'll recall that we had Neil Sturrock, who is with Wave Money in the UK. We had Jeremy Dissel, who is with StubHub in the United States. And we had Shannon Birch, who works with Neo Financial out of Canada. And what they were talking about in terms of what they're looking for in an outsourced services partner or a technology partner, from the standpoint of people who are actually making the decision on who to work with or what technologies to procure, that really was a standout to me. And certainly I think was very much so for a lot of people who were attending.
Agree. We have another question, Peter, before we wrap up today's session on the chat, which is related to the survey and AI, so grouping everything together. How predominantly did AI feature in the survey? It's being sold as the cure-all, which makes me laugh, for everything, from the frontline support to security. But what is really the rate of adoption?
I love that question. And thanks very much to the individual who sent that in. Look, there's a couple of things. I agree. It is being sold as the cure-all for everything. And in terms of the survey itself, we have definitely picked up the fact that roughly 4 out of 5 enterprise CX decision makers feel that there will be increased demand for AI-driven solutions within the scope of their own operations. That should come as no surprise. Sure. What I think is very important, though, to keep in mind here, Lauren, is the fact that when it comes right down to it, when we're taking a look at what are the areas of investment, what are the pain points within captive operations, AI and AI management are certainly, I would say, up there in terms of the ratings or the rankings of the enterprise decision makers that took part, but they're not necessarily penetrating that top 3 or that top 4, top 5. I think it's definitely something that is top of mind, but I think there are things that are more top of mind right now. Equally speaking, when we ask the question, what would a captive CX decision maker be looking for in terms of what a BPO can bring to the table? AI was relatively important, but it wasn't one of, say, the top 3 or 4 elements that they would be considering. Look, I think that going back to the questioner, and what I think is very, very apropos and a very insightful comment about how this is being sold as cure-all for everything. People are growing tired of it in our industry. People are growing tired of this constant buzz around AI and Gen AI. And it's Lauren. I was speaking at a conference in the UK about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Manchester, the CCMA put on, and I was saying Gen AI is like the most used cliche. I don't remember hearing the word Gen since the song Jenny on the Block came out like about 15 years ago. And I think that people are really growing tired of the hype cycle. I think they're growing tired of the open rhetoric, the empty rhetoric. What they're looking for now when it comes to AI or Gen AI or whatever the heck we want to call it these days, what they're looking for are use cases, practical application in the near and medium term. Where is this technology going? What are we looking for long term? And I think the other thing too is we've seen this movie before. Okay, we know how it ends. I remember when I got into this industry back in the early 2000s, speech automated IVR was going to kill the call center. Guess what? Didn't happen. And then about 7-8 years later, well, new forms of automation were going to come out, going to kill the contact center. Didn't happen. Here we are with Gen AI, and everyone's saying Gen AI is going to kill the call center. No, it's not. It's going to force us to reinvent the contact center. It's going to force us to rethink how CX operations work, from all things related to frontline delivery, to agent assist, to information security and data protection. Absolutely. But is it going to destroy what we have spent 30, 40 years building up as an industry? Absolutely not. This is still a people-driven business. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I had an incident last week, and it was very much a chat box speaking to me on WhatsApp about a very frustrating problem with a retailer. And it was so obvious to me, whether it's AI driven, whether it's chatbot, whatever they're using, a mixture of both. And they were able to pull data very quickly, but I was looking for the customer service. That's what I was looking for. And I actually said, can I speak to a human? And the chat box responded to me, I am Susan. You are speaking to Susan.
No, you're not.
And it's just like, no, I'm not. Right? So Lauren, it took me as a consumer to go and find then a phone number to then be fronted with then another chatbot. And then it took me a matter of days before an actual human contacted me. So I just find that, and it really left a bad taste from a CX perspective with that particular retailer. So that's a live scenario.
And I'll tell you something. I think that if you do a quick LinkedIn search and take a look at the number of people that have had very similar type experiences, you're going to find a plethora, like hundreds, if not thousands of examples.
Absolutely.
You know, I'll go back to the Omnibus survey for a second. A question that we added in this year, because this is a particular bugbear of mine, the poor digital service that people are getting. We asked the question about the extent to which organizations were seeing improvements in service, the number of organizations that felt that service was staying flat, or the number of organizations or the proportion that felt it was going down. When it came to digital service, when it came to non-voice, roughly 1 in 5 said that they were showing improvement. You've got 4 out of 5 that are saying that they're staying flat or it's getting worse. Most of them are saying staying flat, but I mean, Lauren, you and I have been around the block enough to know that when somebody says, yeah, things are about the same, they're staying flat, they're getting worse. We all know that. Like, it's psychology. Nobody wants to admit it. And I think that this is going to become probably one of the biggest challenges for organizations in 2024 and 2025. So many companies have deployed so-called AI-driven chatbots that they were probably oversold by the provider, by the solutions provider, and they're starting to reap the consequences. And you can only say, well, we can lose X number of customers for so long. When you start having dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people having been turned off because of a bad chatbot experience and aren't going to come back, that's a massive amount of opportunity cost in terms of retaining a customer versus having to invest the money to go out and find new ones.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, could talk all day to you, Peter. You're a wealth of knowledge.
You're too kind. Thank you.
But like, hopefully the next time we will be talking over a pint of Guinness or 3, being the Irish woman that I am.
Just 3.
Well, who knows? You're half Irish. I worry.
Well, exactly. Only the good half. You know, I will say this. Before, for the audience knowledge, before we were live, a few of us were talking about a certain pub in Wexford that has a bit of a history to it. So I think we can all meet there and we can swap CX stories among others.
Absolutely. And look, thank you to our audience as well for listening today. Very much appreciated. Hope to see some of you there at CX Outsourcers in Munich next year. And Peter, very much looking forward to our pints of Guinness in Dublin and many more pints in Munich. Thanks a million, Peter.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Pleasure as always. Take care.